following on from Andrea, my name is Andrew Fenner. I work with Ericsson Software Technologies, which is a part of Ericsson. A lot of what Andrea said is definitely true for Ericsson. We have multiple CI/CD systems. Probably almost every tool you can imagine is there. Some of them a lot of long-term historical pipelines and experiments with many newer tools as well. Because as soon as you stop bringing in the new thing, you're already very old. So this was a proof of concept that we have done where we have tried to use CDEvents to try and get some findings with it. So just to start to go through it. So it's quite late for a lot of people that have been here for the whole week. I think I'm going to say explicitly what everybody should be saying. What's the real purpose of the talk? It's not to tell you about CDEvents. It's really, we need your help. Okay, and every single talk should probably have said that, right? But I think we've got to the point where people are tired and subtlety needs to go out the door. So CDEvents needs more people. It needs and I'll go through sort of why that is later. Andrea has covered a lot of this, but very quickly, what's the whole purpose of CDEvents? The whole purpose of CDEvents is to get the interoperability. It's so that we can start using all the tools independent of each other. So there's events defined in all the different areas, so like the source control events, and they're independent of the tools that would be generating those events. Same for the integration events, like there's those generic events that should be usable by any of the different tools. And again, one of the things we need help with is the actual definition of the contents of those events, because we need as broad a community as possible to get some consensus on what is the key data that needs to be in those events, as well as figuring out which particular events are most important. Based on CloudEvents, and I don't have a fancy QR link, it's CDEvents.dev. Okay, so what's our basic demo? So the basic demo layout is I want that I have an SCM. Our SCM, it's fairly much the SCM of choice in Ericsson is Gerrit, right? So I want that I make a code change in Gerrit. That triggers a build job in our CI tool of choice. It's Jenkins. That's the CI tool of choice in Ericsson. It's not the only CI tool, but it's a big majority of them. That results in a deployment. Flux is chosen because it's the tool that we've been working with, but there's other tools can go there as you want. And then after the deployment, that I have another test case, and I go back to Jenkins because it was this. I'm going to tell you the real reason was I really should have put Spinnaker there, right? But actually, the problem with putting Spinnaker in is when I want to do a demo, it's a monster to deploy, and it would make my demo really, really fragile. So a little bit of laziness in putting, but the idea here is that you can just have another tool that you can just tie onto a chain, and then we want some sort of monitoring. Okay, so then what's our solution to this problem? And this is something I'll come back to. Our solution to the problem was we had Gerrit. We didn't want to go and start changing the innards of Gerrit, right? We felt again, maybe we can be wrong in this, but we felt the time scales for us to do this would be very long to get that, something accepted into the community and push it in. And also we see Gerrit as being just one of the SCM tools. You've got GitHub, GitLab, and we want to get it into all of those tools. So this is where we took the webhook approach, that webhook translator approach that Andrea was referring to, where we've basically built a translator. So we use the existing webhook mechanism from Gerrit. There's also one from GitHub and GitLab, where they send out events in sort of their proprietary formats. we basically make a translator that converts them into CDEvents. Then they go to our broker of choice, in our case Knative Eventing. Then we've set up a trigger. It's just a standard Knative Eventing trigger, nothing to do with CDEvents, that calls the webhook within Jenkins. So it's a standard webhook within Jenkins that allows, and we can basically trigger it with the CDEvent. And then Fidelity had made a basic plugin for CDEvents in Jenkins, so we just configure to use that, and that sends out CDEvents based on pipeline executions within Jenkins, and we've just configured that to go back to the Knative Eventing. Then another trigger to trigger Flux. Flux. Here we have with EST, we made a contribution to Flux to make a specific receiver in Flux to receive a CDEvent. And we're working with the Flux community to try and add in a provider so that Flux will send CDEvents as well. That's a work in progress. But for this proof of concept, we use the proof of concept that we used for the Flux. So we have a provider where the Flux sends out a CDEvent back to the Knative Eventing, which then goes to another trigger back into Jenkins. Then, the triggers on the top there, they're all quite specific, filtered triggers. They're looking for specific CDEvents to trigger the next action. Then we have a second counter, right, which is basically just a Python script where written into a Docker container where we have a trigger that basically is all CDEvents. So all CDEvents that you see coming in, send it to our counter program and then we just scrape it from Prometheus. We scrape the results for that from Prometheus. So this is my some observations, some monitoring. The next thing is just some other details. We've used the Go SDK for the translator. Okay. The Jenkins plugin is written in Java, fitting in with Java, so it's using the Java SDK. Flux is using Go, so we've used the Go SDK there. It was quite relatively easy. And then there's Jenkins, and then we've just got some basic Python for a Python receiver. I think it's we're just trying to show like it's easy to work with the CDEvents in various different environments. Okay, so that's. Now we'll go to show some of the demo. Okay, so what? Is this going to work? No. Sorry about this. Making a mess. Okay, so first of all, just going through some of the setup that we have. So within the Gerrit, what we basically have done is we've just set up. There's a webhook plugin within Gerrit. So we've basically set up the webhook plugin to send all events to our translator. So it's possible to put filtering in here, and that's just using the capabilities of Gerrit. You can do the same in GitHub or GitLab. Then within Jenkins, there's the CDEvents plugin within Jenkins, so just to put that there, and looking here, I think I have it here, within the Jenkins configuration, you can set up the CDEvents plugin to point to whether it's going to log the CDEvents into syslog, Kinesis, or we've set it up to pump it out into a HTTP address. Okay, so, and then to the last thing is here, right? So what we have is basically we've got an amount of different triggers within my Kubernetes cluster. So I've set up the different triggers to forward to the different tools, right? And you can set up the different filters. And actually, one of the experiences that we had during the demo was that, like, I was using an older version of Knative eventing. I set up the demo. I ended up getting into an infinite loop of the jobs being triggered within Jenkins because I wasn't filtering them correctly. Then what I found was just updated the version of Knative eventing that I was using. So it had more sophisticated filtering that I could use, so I could break my infinite loop of triggers. And I actually think that goes to show the power of going to this approach of decoupling all the different tools. Because by decoupling all the tools, I could start to get the capabilities, to use the capabilities of the different tools, and as they advance, I can start to use them independently. So there's relatively quickly, going back here, that's the triggers. This is the provider within Flux. So we've set up a provider within Flux, and we've also set up a receiver within Flux. So when you set up a receiver within Flux, it gives you an endpoint that you can, and that's what we trigger by sending the CDEvent to. So going back, then what we have is within my Gerrit, I have all my patch sets. You can see lots of experiments doing this earlier. So I have one open patch, and here, this is my patch set within Gerrit, and this is one of the things I'm changing. So key thing is to see we're changing an attribute as the updated time on the deployment that we have. So hopefully at the end of the demo, we're going to see this time coming out in the deployment. It looks like it's a really long time ago because my laptop is still running in Irish time. So I'm just going to +2 this, all that careful checking, and submit it. Okay, so that should then trigger the jobs within the Jenkins. So fingers crossed, we're at that moment within any demo. So the next thing is what we have done is also it's starting to work. We've set up like Prometheus scraping from the counters that we were generating, where we just listened to all the events, and we were basically just creating counters based on the different event types. So you can see here we as part of the demo we were monitoring, and the event type was CDEvents change merged, so it just logged as the name. So you can see that we got a change merged when I merged the change, and then what we should also see is that's after triggering. Now that we got pick the right one, we got a pipeline run finished. So this was the first pipeline that we got triggered on the change merge, and then we will get, take rid of this, we'll get a service deployed, which is the event that was sent by Flux when the service got deployed, and then we should actually get a second pipeline run finished when the second Jenkins job was run. Okay, so if I go back into my dashboard, I should see now here, I see my last success, so the 2 jobs got executed. So if I look into the service deployed as the example, looking at the configuration here, we've basically just set up that we are receiving the CDEvent context and the CDEvent subject. So we've set up that the information that's coming into the Jenkins job is the CDEvent, and we've just basically used the standard configuration of the event. So we'll go into the last one, and you can see we've configured the job just to print out, so this is all the information that's after coming out from the CDEvent. And that information is available within the job in order to drive what you do in the job. Now, what I do in the jobs is completely trivial. It's, just basically hello world. But the key thing here is, what I do is as part of my job, I basically do a curl to my deployment to print out what the environment variables are, and the key thing is that I have my time here. So, got the loop up together. Okay, so I'm going to say what I did was I made a rookie mistake I spent way too long getting the demo to work and not nearly enough time on the presentation. Okay, so from the current slide. So it's obviously brilliant, fantastic. This is the technology that's going to take over the world, right? I think we're all convinced of that now, right? Okay, right. So what's the problem? Why hasn't it taken over the world, right? Because there's a bit of a chicken and egg problem, right? It is a fairly good idea. It's not the absolute genius idea. It's a decent idea, right? But the problem is, in order for it to be useful, it has to be in enough tools and working well enough, because all of the problems have already all fairly much been solved. All the point-to-point integrations are done, and that's what people have used, right? So there's quite a big barrier to entry before this becomes good enough to be better than that effort. But so that's the chicken and egg. For it to gain enough momentum, it has to get into enough tools with a high enough quality and capability to prove that it's better. Conceptually, the idea is better, but it needs to get there with implementation, and that's just a bit of chipping away. Get it into the tools, get it into a good variety of the different tools. Like, we need a translator for GitHub, you need a translator for Gerrit, you need a translator for GitLab, you need a translator for Git. Because otherwise what will happen is people will look, it doesn't work for my tool chain. Don't use it at all. And until you get that there's enough momentum behind, there's a problem.
Most persons, they'll write their own.
Pardon?
They'll write their own tool chain.
Or they'll write their own tool chain. And then here, this is some of my other comments. Like, CDEvents, it's no silver bullet. So like, I'm not trying to oversell something. And actually this I think is actually one of the other things that can slow down the development of CDEvents. The most important thing about CDEvents is actually the concept of let your tool chain be event driven. That's the most important, my understanding, that's the most important thing about CDEvents. And people can do that themselves without it being CDEvents. So they don't have to contribute to the CDEvents. They can sort of steal the concept, go, I'll make my tool chain event driven. It would be better if they all amalgamated on CDEvents, but there's a problem. The other problem is, even the demo that I described, I can think of 3 different ways to do it. And if I can think of 3 different ways, probably almost everybody here can think of maybe some overlapping, but also independently ways. I'm not saying they're good ways of doing it, right? But there's different ways. So again, it makes it harder to build up a community that needs CDEvents. And especially if I have a small pipeline. If my pipeline is small, the point-to-point integrations are probably good enough. The point-to-point integrations really become a problem when I have a long tool chain and lots of different tools. But a lot of people are happy with a 2 or 3 long tool chain. So that takes an amount of our community away. I think we should start with observability, right? It's a low-risk use case, and it can get CDEvents into a lot of tools, and it's a genuine benefit that people can get very early on, because a lot of the problem with the point-to-point integrations is that it basically is invisible to everybody. And then don't try to sell, because people will be very reluctant to have CDEvents controlling their pipelines, because that's a big risk. You're risking my production system by doing that. But if you can see that we've driven it with observability and then move on to control. And thank you. And any questions?